The Haida is the only surviving member of the tribal class of destroyers and served in the Second World War, as well as the Korean War, entering service in 1943 and leaving service in 1963. As Canada's most successful warship in terms of surface vessels sunk, it has been called the fightingest ship in the Royal Canadian Navy. I guess that's a word? The Haida was built in England, being laid down in September 1941, launched in August 1942, and commissioned in August 1943. The ship was named after the Haida people of the Pacific Northwest Coast, part of the native Canadian tribal groups collectively known as the First Nations. As a later addition to the tribal class, the ship was equipped somewhat differently to the original armament specification of the design. Her main battery consisted of 3 twin 4.7-inch gun turrets instead of 4, with the upper forward turret, or B turret, replaced by a twin 4-inch high-angle mount for better anti-aircraft fire. A quadruple 40mm mount and 6 20mm guns completed the anti-aircraft battery. A quadruple torpedo launcher, 1 depth charge rail, and 2 depth charge launchers completed the weapons loadout in total. It also came with an array of radar, sonar, and fire control equipment that meant its ability to hunt underwater, surface, and airborne threats was greatly enhanced compared to the original specification, and reflected what surviving tribal-class destroyers were being refitted to. The engines were able to achieve 36.5 knots maximum speed, with an in-service limit of 32 knots, making it one of the faster examples of this particular class. The Haida joined the British Home Fleet and first saw action escorting Arctic convoys to and from Russia. In this role, the Haida was part of the escort of convoy JW-55B when it came under attack from the German battleship Scharnhorst, but as part of the convoy's close escort, as opposed to the distant escort, it was responsible for ensuring the merchant ships reached port safely as opposed to chasing down the raider herself. In January 1944, she was reassigned to the 10th Destroyer Flotilla, based on the UK southern coast, and took part in a number of sweeps of the Bay of Biscay and the English Channel, in company with other tribal-class destroyers and 2 Dido-class cruisers, the Black Prince and Bellona. This was somewhat ironic, since these vessels were the other half of the design lineage that had resulted in the tribal class, with both ships sharing a starting point as the interwar Design V. In late April, the Haida was involved in 2 battles with German destroyers. The first saw the T-27 and T-24 damaged and forced to return to port, whilst Haida managed to sink the T-29. A few days later, the 2 damaged vessels had been repaired, and Haida, along with Athabaskan, engaged them. The Athabaskan was torpedoed and sunk, whilst Haida drove the T-27 aground and set it on fire. Haida would then rescue 44 survivors from her sister ship before returning to port. Further operations in June saw Haida and Huron take on the German 9th Destroyer Flotilla and managing to sink Z-32. Later that month, Haida and Eskimo went to investigate an Allied bomber dropping depth charges on something. After firing their own depth charges at what the bomber said was a submarine, they spotted U-971 surfacing and managed to sink it with gunfire. The fun didn't stop there. Operating alongside other ships, including the Polish destroyer Błyskawica, the Haida was part of raids during July and August that saw 5 smaller German warships and several merchant ships sunk. During one of these battles, a shell exploded in one of her turrets and started a fire that killed 2 crew and knocked the turret out of action. But by September, the ship was due for a refit, after which it was back to the Arctic convoy duties. As part of the escort of convoy JW-66, the Haida and Huron were targeted by U-boats, but responded by sinking 2 of them in exchange for the loss of HMS Goodall, which was hit by one of the first acoustic homing torpedoes. At the end of the European part of the Second World War, the ship was sent to take custody of a number of surrendered submarines as part of the 5th Escort Group. The Canadian tribal-class ships were then sent to Halifax in Canada to refit in anticipation of the invasion of Japan, but this refit was suspended when Japan surrendered. After a year in reserve, the ship was refitted with a new armament layout which replaced the main battery with 2 updated twin 4-inch mounts forward and a single twin 3-inch mount aft. The second rear turret was replaced by a pair of anti-submarine mortars. The anti-aircraft battery was also simplified to 4 single 40mm guns. With a new radar and sonar arrays and a new pennant number, she spent several years taking part in exercises with British and American fleets before being sent to take part in the Korean War. This service was less eventful than her earlier missions and consisted of aircraft carrier escort duty and the occasional shore bombardment mission, mostly against enemy railways. At the end of the war, she was sent back to the Atlantic for anti-submarine duties, but an escalating list of issues caused by age meant that she was finally decommissioned in 1963. Also listed for scrapping, she was saved but for preservation by private interests and was restored, although she retains her later armament fit. You can visit her in Hamilton, Ontario, in Canada.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.